Hey crew, it's Bit, and I am back with some more Esoterica. We are diving back into the works of Mr. Manly Hall. We are dealing with the secret teachings of all ages. We are up to the chemical marriage. We are reading along and discussing as we go along the various points of interest that are brought to light by the text. But before we begin, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there are several playlists linked up here in the corner and in the box down below, along with the original source material, so that you can have a better understanding of who I am, what I believe in, what I stand for. I feel like it has been fairly well outlined in each of those particular playlists. With that being said, we are going to dive into and discuss the chemical marriage. The self-admitted author of The Chemical Marriage, Johann Valentin Andre, born in Württemberg in 1586, was 28 years of age when that work was first published. It was presumably written about 12 years prior to its publication, or when the author was 15 or 16 years old. The fact is almost incredible that one so young could produce a volume containing the wealth of symbolic thought and philosophy hidden between the lines of The Chemical Marriage. This book makes the earliest known reference to Christian Rosenkreuz and is generally regarded as the third of the series of original Rosicrucian manifestos. As a symbolic work, the book itself is hopelessly irreconcilable with the statements made by Andre concerning it. The story of The Chemical Marriage relates in detail a series of incidents occurring to an aged man, presumably the Father CRC of the Fama and Confessio. If Father CRC was born in 1378, as stated in the Confessio, and is identical with the Christian Rosenkreuz of The Chemical Marriage, he was elevated to the dignity of a Knight of the Golden Stone in the 81st year of his life, 1459. In the light of his own statements, it is inconceivable that Andre could have been Father Rosencrantz. Many figures found in the various books on symbolism published in the early part of the 17th century bear a striking resemblance to the characters and episodes in The Chemical Marriage. The alchemical wedding may prove to be the key to the riddle of Baconian Rosicrucianism. The presence in the German text of The Chemical Marriage of some words in English indicates its author to have been conversant also with that language. The following summary of the main episodes of the 7 days of The Chemical Marriage will give the reader a fairly comprehensive idea of the profundity of its symbolism. The first day. Christian Rosenkreuz, having prepared in his heart the Paschal lamb, together with a small unleavened loaf, was disturbed while at prayer one evening before Easter by a violent storm which threatened to demolish not only his little house, but the very hill upon which it stood. In the midst of the tempest he was touched on the back, and, turning, he beheld a glorious woman with wings filled with eyes, and robed in sky-colored garments spangled with stars. In one hand she held a trumpet, and in the other a bundle of letters in every language. Handing a letter to CRC, she immediately ascended into the air, at the same time blowing upon her trumpet a blast which shook the house. Upon the seal of the letter was a curious cross, and the words, In hoc signo vinces. Within, traced in letters of gold on an azure field, was an invitation to a royal wedding. CRC was deeply moved by the invitation because it was the fulfillment of a prophecy which he had received 7 years before. But so unworthy did he feel that he was paralyzed with fear. At length, after resorting to prayer, he sought sleep. In his dreams he found himself in a loathsome dungeon with a multitude of other men, all bound and fettered with great chains. The grievousness of their sufferings was increased as they stumbled over each other in the darkness. Suddenly, from above came the sound of trumpets. The cover of the dungeon was lifted, and a ray of light pierced the gloom. Framed in the light stood a hoary-headed man, who announced that a rope would be lowered 7 times, and whoever could cling to the rope would be drawn up to freedom. Great confusion ensued. All sought to grasp the rope, and many were pulled away from it by others. CRC despaired of being saved, but suddenly the rope swung towards him, and grasping it, he was raised from the dungeon. An aged woman, called the Ancient Matron, wrote in a golden yellow book the names of those drawn forth, and each of the redeemed was given for remembrance a piece of gold, bearing the symbol of the sun and the letters DLS CRC, who had been injured, DLS. This is a new CRC, who had been injured while clinging to the rope, found it difficult to walk. The aged woman bade him not to worry, but to thank God, who had permitted him to come into so high a light. Thereupon trumpets sounded, and CRC awoke. But so vivid was the dream that he was still sensible of the wounds received while asleep. With renewed faith, CRC arose and prepared himself for the hermetic marriage. He donned a white linen coat and bound a red ribbon crosswise over his shoulders. In his hat he stuck 4 roses, and for food he carried bread, water, and salt. Before leaving his cottage he knelt and vowed that whatever knowledge was revealed to him he would devote to the service of his neighbor, and then departed from the house with joy. The 3, the bread, the water, and the salt, can represent the Trinity. We have seen that before, right? The body, the mind, the part that makes the decisions, the soul, and the becoming, right? That is, bread being the earth, salt being the soul, and water being the becoming. The second day, as he entered the forest surrounding his little house, it seemed to CRC that all nature had joyously prepared for the wedding. As he proceeded, singing merrily, he came to a green heath in which stood 3 great cedars, one bearing a tablet with an inscription describing the 4 paths that led to the palace of the king. The first short and dangerous, the second circuitous, the third a pleasant and royal road, and the 4th suitable only for incorruptible bodies. Weary and perplexed, CRC decided to rest, and cutting a slice of bread, was about to partake thereof when a white dove begged it from him. The dove was at once attacked by a raven, and in his efforts to separate the birds, CRC unknowingly ran a considerable distance along one of the 4 paths, that leading southward. A terrific wind prevented him from retracing his steps. The wedding guest resigned himself to the loss of his bread, and continued along the road until he espied in the distance a great gate. The sun being low, he hastened towards the portal, upon which, among other figures, was a tablet bearing the words, Procul hinc procul it eprofani. So he lost the bread, which would be the body. A gatekeeper in sky-colored habit immediately asked CRC for his letter of invitation, and, on receiving it, bade him enter and requested that he purchase a token. After describing himself as a brother of the Red Rosy Cross, CRC received in exchange for his water bottle a golden disc bearing the letters SC. Night drawing near, the wanderer hastened on to a second gate, guarded by a lion, and to which was affixed a tablet with the words Date et dabitur volis, where he presented a letter given him by the first gatekeeper. Being urged to purchase a token bearing the letters SM, he gave his little package of salt, and then hastened on to reach the palace gates before they were locked in the night. And salt being representative here of the soul and the power of choice. Right, if the allegory bears true. A beautiful virgin called Virgo Lucifera was extinguishing the castle lights as CRC approached, and he was barely able to squeeze through the closing gates. As they closed, he caught part of his coat, which he was forced to leave behind. Here his name was written in the Lord Bridegroom's little vellum book, and he was presented with a new pair of shoes, and also a token bearing the letters SPN. He was then conducted by pages to a small chamber where the ice-gray locks were cut from the crown of his head by invisible barbers, after which he was ushered into a spacious hall, where a goodly number of kings, princes, and commoners were assembled. At the sound of trumpets, each seated himself at the table, taking a position corresponding to his dignity, so that CRC received a very humble seat. Most of the pseudo-philosophers present being feigned pretenders, the banquet became an orgy, which, however, suddenly ceased at the sound of stately and inspired music. For nearly half an hour no one spoke. Then, amidst a great sound, the door of the dining hall swung open, and thousands of lighted tapers, held by invisible hands, entered. These were followed by the two pages, lighting the beautiful Virgo Lucifera, seated on a self-moving throne. The white and gold-robed virgin then rose and announced that to prevent the admission of unworthy persons to the mystical wedding, a set of scales would be erected the following day, upon which each guest would be weighed to determine his integrity. Those unwilling to undergo this ordeal, she stated, should remain in the dining hall. She then withdrew, but many of the tapers stayed to accompany the guests to their quarters for the night. All right, now this is title page of 1616 edition of Chemische Hochzeit Christian Rosenkreuz. We're going to enlarge it. It is in German, I'm assuming. Maybe Latin, I don't know. Ergo seems Latinish. From Rosenkreuz, Chemical Marriage. The most remarkable of all the publications involved in the Rosicrucian controversy is that of the Chemical Marriage, published in Strasbourg. This work, which is very rare, should be reproduced in exact facsimile to provide students with the opportunity of examining the actual text for the various forms of cipher employed. Probably no other volume in the history of literature created such a profound disturbance as this unpretentious little book. Immediately following its publication, the purpose for which the volume was intended became the subject of popular speculation. It was both attacked and defended by theologians and philosophers alike, and when the various contending elements are simmered down, the mysteries surrounding the book remain unsolved. That its author was a man of exceptional learning was admitted, and it is noteworthy that those minds which possessed the deepest understanding of nature's mysteries were among those profoundly impressed by the contents of the Chemical Marriage. I would like to get my hands on an English translation of that. If y'all have, at least remind me to look for it, because I will forget. Most of those present were presumptuous enough to believe that they could be safely weighed, but 9, including CRC, felt their shortcomings so deeply that they feared the outcome and remained in the hall, while the others were led away to their sleeping chambers. These 9 were bound with ropes and left alone in the darkness. CRC then dreamed that he saw many men suspended over the earth by threads, and among them flew an aged man, who, cutting here and there a thread, caused many to fall to earth. Those who in arrogance had soared to lofty heights accordingly fell a greater distance and sustained more serious injury than the more humble ones, who, falling but a short distance, often landed without mishap. Considering this dream to be a good omen, CRC related it to a companion, continuing in discourse with him until dawn. The third day. Soon after dawn the trumpets sounded, and the Virgo Lucifera, arrayed in red velvet, girded with a white sash, and crowned with a laurel wreath, entered, accompanied by 200 men in red and white livery. She intimated to CRC and his 8 companions that they might fare better than the others, self-satisfied guests. Golden scales were then hung in the midst of the hall, and near them were placed 7 weights, 1 good-sized, 4 small, and 2 very large. The men in livery, each carrying a naked sword and a strong rope, were divided into 7 groups, and from each group was chosen a captain, who was given charge of one of the weights. Having remounted her high throne, Virgo Lucifera ordered the ceremony to begin. The first to step on the scales was an emperor so virtuous that the balances did not tip until 6 weights had been placed on the opposite end. He was therefore turned over to the 6th group. The rich and poor alike stood on the scales, but only a few passed the tale successfully. To these were given Greek velvet robes and wreaths of laurel, after which they were seated upon the steps of Virgo Lucifera's throne. Those who failed were ridiculed and scourged. The Inquisition being finished, one of the captains begged Virgo Lucifera to permit the 9 men who had declared themselves unworthy also to be weighed, and this caused CRC anguish and fear. One of the first 7, one succeeded and was greeted with joy. CRC was the 8th, and he not only withstood all the weights, but even when 3 men hung on the opposite end of the beam, he could not be moved. A page cried out, "That is he!" CRC was quickly set at liberty and permitted to release one of the captives. He chose the first emperor. Virgo Lucifera then requested the red roses that CRC carried, which he immediately gave her. The ceremony of the scales ended about 10 o'clock in the forenoon. After agreeing upon the penalties to be imposed upon those whose shortcomings had been thus exposed, a dinner was served to all. The few successful artists, including CRC, were given the chief seats, after which the golden fleece and a flying lion were bestowed upon them in the name of the bridegroom. Virgo Lucifera then presented a magnificent goblet to the guests, stating that the king had requested all to share its contents. Following this, CRC and his companions were taken out upon a scaffolding where they beheld the various penalties suffered by those who failed. Before leaving the palace, each of the rejected guests were given a draught of forgetfulness. The elect then returned to the castle, where to each was assigned a learned page, who conducted them through the various parts of the edifice. CRC saw many things his companions were not privileged to behold, including the royal sepulchre, where he learned more than is extant in all books. He also visited a magnificent library and an observatory containing a great globe, 30 feet in diameter, and with all the countries of the world marked upon it. At supper, the various guests propounded enigmas, and CRC solved the riddle which Virgo Lucifera asked concerning her own identity. Then entered the dining hall 2 youths and 6 virgins, beautifully robed, followed by a 7th virgin wearing a coronet. The latter was called the Duchess, and was mistaken for the Hermetic Bride. The Duchess told CRC that he had received more than the others, therefore should make a greater return. The Duchess then asked each of the virgins to pick up one of the 7 weights, which still remained in the great room. To Virgo Lucifera was given the heaviest weight, which hung in the Queen's chamber during the singing of a hymn. In the 2nd chamber, the 1st virgin hung her weight during a similar ceremony. Thus, they proceeded from room to room until the weights had been disposed of. The Duchess then presented her hand to CRC and his companions, and, followed by her virgins, withdrew. Pages then conducted the guests to their sleeping chambers. The one assigned to CRC was hung with rare tapestries and with beautiful paintings. The 4th day, after washing and drinking in the garden from a fountain which bore several inscriptions, one of them reading, "Drink, brothers, and live," the guests, led by Virgo Lucifera, ascended the 365 steps of the royal winding stairs. The guests were given wreaths of laurel, and, a curtain being raised, found themselves in the presence of the king and queen. CRC was awestruck by the glory of the throne room, and especially by the magnificence of the queen's robes, which were so dazzling that he could not gaze upon them. Each guest was presented to the king by one of the virgins, and after this ceremony the Virgo Lucifera made a short speech in which she recited the achievements of the honest artists, and begged that each be questioned as to whether she had properly fulfilled her duty. Old Atlas then stepped forward, and in the name of their royal majesties greeted the intrepid band of philosophers, and assured Virgo Lucifera that she should receive a royal reward. The length of the throne room was 5 times its width. To the west was a great porch in which stood 3 thrones, the central one elevated. On each throne sat 2 persons. On the first, an ancient king with a young consort. On the third, a black king with a veiled matron beside him. And on the central throne, 2 young persons, over whose head hung a large and costly crown, about which hovered a little Cupid, who shot his arrows first at the 2 lovers and then about the hall. Before the queen a book, bound in black velvet, lay on a small altar, on which were golden decorations. Beside this were a burning candle, a celestial globe, a small striking watch, a little crystal pipe from which ran a stream of clear, blood-red liquor, and a skull with a white serpent crawling in and out of the orbits. After their presentations, the guests retired down the winding stairs to the great hall. All right, we're going to stop this and talk about it for a second, right? Because this is interesting, right? We have the Trinity, we have the 3, which is one of the numbers of manifestation, right? You have 1, 3, and 8. Those are the important numbers. 7 always leads into 8, which is the beginning of the new. So 7 is acceptable, but 8 is the beginning of the new cycle. So 8 is the actual number. We have the 3 here, right? And we have an old man and a young man, which would represent the lower, baser, mortal, coil parts. You have the black king and the veiled matron beside him, which we talked yesterday about the assimilation of the 2. Right now, I associate the black with the feminine and the white with the masculine, but it can be the other. It doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. The understanding that it is light and dark, it is creative and destructive, it is the balance of these things which is represented, and that is the spiritual half above the heart. And then the 2 lovers in the heart itself, in the central, most important of the dioceses. This absolutely fits my preconceived notions of what my keys go to. So it does fit my interpretation of the path to ascension or enlightenment or whatever you happen to want to call it. Now let's look at these decorations right here, right? The queen, before the queen, a book bound in black velvet lay on a small altar, on which were golden decorations. Beside there was a burning candle, a celestial globe, a small striking watch, a little crystal pipe, which ran blood-red liquor, and a skull with white serpent crawling in and out of the orbits. Now, if you add that to the book, bound in black velvet, on the altar, that makes 7, which may or may not be important, right? It's not a clear lock for the key. The key to the philosophical secret, from Ashmole's Theatrum Chemicum Britannicum. Let's see. Here followeth the figure conveying all the secrets of the treatise, both great and small. Most of this is in a language that I don't read, apparently, but our heaven this figure called is, over table also of the lower astronomy, which I can't really make it out that well. Anyway, let's see what it says. This plate, which is the key to the mystic Christian alchemy, is missing from almost every copy of the Theatrum Chemicum Britannicum, a work compiled by Elias Ashmole and containing about a score of pieces by English poets treating of the philosopher's stone and the hermetic mysteries. In view of the consistent manner in which the plate disappeared, it is possible that the diagram was purposely removed because it revealed too plainly the Rosicrucian arcana. Worthy of notice, also, is the care with which the owners' names have been effaced from early books pertaining to alchemy and hermeticism. The original names are usually rendered illegible, being covered with heavy ink lines, the procedure often seriously defacing the volume. While an occasional exception is found, in practically every instance the mutilated books either deal with Rosicrucianism or contain cryptic writings of suspected Rosicrucian origin. It is presumed that this practice of obliterating the owners' names was to prevent the early Rosicrucians and Hermeticists from being discovered through the volumes composing their libraries. Elias Ashmole's plate shows the analogies between the life of Christ and the 4 grand divisions of the alchemical process. Herein is also revealed the teaching that the Philosopher's Stone itself is a macrocosm and a microcosm, embodying the principles of astronomy and cosmogony, both universal and human. I would like to get a clear diagram, but wants and needs are two different things. Later, the Virgo Lucifera announced that a comedy was to be performed for the benefit of the 6 royal guests in a building called the House of the Sun. CRC and his companions formed part of the royal procession, which, after a considerable walk, arrived at the theater. The play was in 7 acts, and after its happy ending, all returned through the garden and up the winding stairs to the throne room. CRC noticed the young king was very sad, and that at the banquet following he often sent mead to the white serpent in the skull. The feast over, the young king, holding in his hand the little black book from the altar, asked his guests if they would all be true to him through prosperity and adversity. And when they tremblingly agreed, he asked that each person should sign his name in the little black book as proof of his fealty. The royal persons then drank from the little crystal fountain, and others afterwards doing likewise. This was called the draught of silence. The royal persons then sadly shook hands with all present. Suddenly a little bell tinkled, and immediately the kings and queens took off their white garments and donned black ones. The room was hung in sable draperies, and the tables were removed. The eyes of the royal persons were bound with 6 black taffeta scarves, and 6 coffins were placed in the center of the room. An executioner, a Moor, robed in black and bearing an axe, entered and beheaded in turn each of the 6 royal persons. The blood of each was caught in a golden goblet, which was placed in the coffins with the body. The executioner was also decapitated and his head placed in a small chest. The Virgo Lucifera, after assuring our CRC and his companions that all should be well if they were faithful and true, ordered the pages to conduct them to their rooms for the night while she remained to watch with the dead. About midnight, CRC awakened suddenly, and looking from his window beheld 7 ships sailing upon a lake. Above each hovered a flame. These he believed to be the spirits of the beheaded. When the ships reached shore, the Virgo Lucifera met them, and on each of 6 of the vessels was placed a covered coffin. As soon as the coffins had been thus disposed of, the lights were extinguished, and the flames passed back over the lake, so that there remained but 1 light for a watch in each ship. After beholding this strange ceremony, CRC returned to his bed and slept till morning. The 5th day. Rising at daybreak and entreating his page to show him other treasures of the palace, CRC was conducted down many steps to a great iron door bearing a curious inscription, which he carefully copied. Passing through, he found himself in the royal treasury, the light in which came entirely from some huge carbuncles. In the center stood a triangular sepulchre of Lady Venus. Lifting a copper door in the pavement, the page ushered CRC into a crypt, where stood a great bed, upon which, when his guide had raised the coverlets, CRC beheld the body of Venus. Led by his page, CRC then rejoined his companions, saying nothing to them of his experience. Virgo Lucifera, robed in black velvet and accompanied by her virgins, then led the guests out into the courtyard where stood 6 coffins, each with 8 pallbearers. CRC was the only one of the group of artists who suspected the royal bodies were no longer in these coffins. The coffins were lowered into graves and great stones rolled over them. The Virgo Lucifera then made a short oration in which he exhorted each to assist in restoring the royal persons to life, declaring that they should journey with her to the Tower of Olympus, where the medicines necessary to the resurrection of the 6 royal persons could alone be found. CRC and his companions followed the Virgo Lucifera to the seashore, where all embarked on 7 ships, disposed according to a certain strange order. As the ships sailed across the lake and through a narrow channel into the open sea, they were attended by sirens, nymphs, and sea goddesses, who, in honor of the wedding, presented a great and beautiful pearl to the royal couple. When the ships came in sight of the Tower of Olympus, Virgo Lucifera ordered the discharge of cannon to signal their approach. Immediately a white flag appeared upon the tower, and a small gilded pinnace, containing an ancient man, the warden of the tower, with his white-clad guards, came out to meet the ships. The Tower of Olympus stood on an island which was exactly square and was surrounded by a great wall. Entering the gate, the group was led to the bottom of the central tower, which contained an excellent laboratory where the guests were fain to beat and wash plants, precious stones, and all sorts of things, extract their juice and essence, and put these latter into glasses. Virgo Lucifera set the artists to work so arduously that they felt that they were mere drudges. And when the day's work was finished, each was assigned a mattress on the stone floor. Being unable to sleep, CRC wandered about contemplating the stars. Chancing upon a flight of steps leading to the top of the wall, he climbed out and looked out upon the sea, remaining here for some time. About midnight he beheld 7 flames, which, passing over the sea towards him, gathered themselves on the top of the spire of the central tower. Simultaneously the winds arose, the sea became tempestuous, and the moon was covered with clouds. With some fear, CRC ran down the stairs and returned to the tower, and lying down on his mattress, was lulled to sleep by the sound of a gently flowing fountain in the laboratory. The 6th day. The next morning, the aged warden of the tower, after examining the work performed by the wedding guest in the laboratory and finding it satisfactory, caused ladders, ropes, and large wings to be brought forth, and addressed the assembled artists thus: My dear sons, one of these 3 things must each of you this day constantly bear about with him. Lots were cast, and to CRC, much to his chagrin, fell a heavy ladder. Those who secured wings had them fastened to their backs so cunningly that it was impossible to detect that they were artificial. The aged warden then locked the artists in the lower room of the tower. But in a short time a round hole was uncovered in the ceiling, and Virgo Lucifera invited all to ascend. Those with wings flew at once through the opening. Those with ropes had many difficulties, while CRC, with his ladder, made reasonable speed. On the 2nd floor, the wedding guests, musicians, and Virgo Lucifera gathered about a fountain-like contrivance containing the bodies of the 6 royal persons. Virgo Lucifera then placed the Ifmore's head in a kettle-like receptacle in the upper part of the fountain, and poured upon it the substances prepared on the previous day in the laboratory. The virgins placed lamps beneath. These substances, when they boiled, passed out through holes in the sides of the kettle, and, falling upon the bodies in the fountain below, dissolved them. The 6 royal bodies, having been reduced thus to a liquid state, a tap was opened in the lower end of the fountain, and the fluid drained into an immense golden globe, which, when filled, was of great weight. All but the wedding guests then retired, and shortly a hole in the ceiling opened as before, and the guests ascended pell-mell to the 3rd floor. Here the globe was suspended by a strong chain. The walls of the apartment were of glass, and mirrors were so arranged that the sun's rays were concentrated upon the central globe, thus causing it to become very hot. Later the sun's rays were deflected, and the globe permitted to cool, after which it was cut open with a diamond, revealing a beautiful white egg. Carrying this with her, Virgo Lucifera departed. The guests, having ascended through another trapdoor, found themselves upon the 4th floor, where stood a square kettle filled with silver sand, warmed by a gentle fire. The great white egg was placed upon the warm sand to mature. In a short time it cracked, and there emerged an ugly, ill-tempered bird, which was fed with the blood of the beheaded royal persons, diluted with prepared water. At each feeding, its feathers change color. From black they turn to white, and at last they become varicolored, the disposition of the bird improving the while. Dinner was then served, after which Virgo Lucifera departed with the bird. The guests ascended with ropes, ladders, and wings to the 5th floor, where a bath, colored with fine white powder, had been prepared for the bird, which enjoyed bathing in it until the lamps placed beneath the bath caused the water to become uncomfortably warm. When heat had removed all the bird's feathers, it was taken out, but the fire continued until nothing remained in the bath save a sediment in the form of a blue stone. This was later pounded up and made into a pigment. With this, all of the bird except the head was painted. We're going to fall back to this. The universe created by the dual principle of light and darkness. We talk about that quite often. It is the balance of light and dark that leads to true enlightenment. This is an interesting drawing, right? The universe created from Flood's Philosophia Mosaica. The supreme deity is symbolized by the small globe at the top, which is divided into two hemispheres. The dark half representing the divine darkness with which the deity surrounds himself and which serves as his hiding place. The radiant hemisphere signifies the divine light which is in God and which, pouring forth, manifests as the objective, creative power. The large, dark globe to the left and beneath the dark half of the upper sphere signifies the potential darkness which was upon the face of the primordial deep and within which moved the Spirit of God. The light globe to the right is the deity who is revealed out of the darkness. Here, the shining word has dissipated the shadows and glorious universe has been formed. The divine power of this radiant globe is cognizable to man as the sun. The large light in a dark section represents the created universes partaking of the light and the darkness, which are in the nature of the Creator. The dark half represents the deep, or chaos, the eternal waters pouring forth out of the deity. The light half of the circle containing the figure of Apollo represents the diurnal hemisphere of the world, which in the ancient mysteries was ruled over by Apollo. And the dark half circle is the nocturnal hemisphere ruled over by Dionysus, or Dionysus, whose figure is faintly visible in the gloom. The guest thereupon ascended to the 6th floor, where stood a small altar resembling that in the king's throne room. The bird drank from the little fountain and was fed with the blood of the white serpent which crawled through the openings in the skull. The sphere by the altar revolved continuously. The watch struck 1, 2, and then 3, at which time the bird, laying its neck upon the book, suffered itself to be decapitated. Its body was burned to ashes, which were placed in a box of cypress wood. Virgo Lucifera told CRC and 3 of his comrades that they were lazy and sluggish laborators and would therefore be excluded from the 7th room. Musicians were sent for, who with cornets were to blow the 4 in ridicule from the chamber. CRC and his 3 companions were disheartened until the musicians told them to be of good cheer, and led them up a winding stair to the 8th floor of the tower, directly beneath the roof. Here the old warden, standing upon a little round furnace, welcomed them and congratulated them upon being chosen by Virgo Lucifera for this greater work. Virgo Lucifera then entered, and, after laughing at the perplexity of her guest, emptied the ashes of the bird into another vessel, filling the cypress box with useless matter. She thereupon returned to the 7th floor, presumably to mislead those assembled there by setting them to work upon the false ashes in the box. CRC and his 3 friends were set to work moistening the bird's ashes with specially prepared water until the mixture became of dough-like consistency, after which it was heated and molded into 2 miniature forms. Later, these were opened, disclosing 2 bright and almost transparent human images about 4 inches high, homunculi, one male and the other female. These tiny forms were laid upon satin cushions and fed, drop by drop, with the blood of the bird until they grew to normal size and of great beauty. Though the bodies had the consistency of flesh, they showed no signs of life, for the soul was not in them. The bodies were next surrounded with torches and their faces covered with silk. Virgo Lucifera then appeared, bearing two curious white garments. The virgins also entered, among them 6, bearing great trumpets. A trumpet was placed on the mouth of one of the two figures, and CRC saw a tiny hole open in the dome of the tower, and a ray of light descend through the tube of the trumpet and enter the body. This process was repeated 3 times on each body. The 2 newly ensouled forms were then removed upon a traveling couch. In about half an hour the young king and queen awakened, and the Virgo Lucifera presented them with white garments. These they donned as the king in his own person most graciously returned thanks to CRC and his companions, after which the royal persons departed upon a ship. CRC and his 3 privileged friends then rejoined the other artists, making no mention of that which they had seen. Later, the entire party were assigned handsome chambers, where they rested till morning. The 7th day. In the morning, Virgo Lucifera announced that each of the wedding guests had become a Knight of the Golden Stone. The aged warden then presented each man with a golden medal, bearing on one side the inscription At Nat Mai, and the other Tim Na F. The entire company returned in 12 ships to the king's palace. The flags on the vessels bore the signs of the zodiac, and CRC sat under that of Libra. As they entered the lake, many ships met them, and the king and queen, together with their lords, ladies, and virgins, rode forth on a golden barge to greet the returning guests. Atlas then made a short oration on the king's behalf, also asking for the royal presence. In reply, the aged warden delivered to Cupid, who hovered about the royal pair, a small, curious-shaped casket. CRC and the old lord, each bearing a snow-white ensign with a red cross on it, rode in the carriage with the king. At the first gate stood the porter with blue clothes, who, upon seeing CRC, begged him to intercede with the king to release him from the post of servitude. The king replied that the porter was a famous astrologer, who was forced to keep the gate as a punishment for the crime of having gazed upon Lady Venus reposing upon her couch. The king further declared that the porter could be released only when another was found who had committed the same crime. Upon hearing this, CRC's heart sank, for he realized himself to be the culprit, but he remained silent at that time. The newly created Knights of the Golden Stone were obliged to subscribe to 5 articles drawn up by His Royal Highness, that they would ascribe their order only to God and His handmaid, Nature, that they should abominate all uncleanness and vice, that they should always be ready to assist the worthy and needy, that they should not use their knowledge and power for the attainment of worldly dignity, that they should not desire to live longer than God had decreed. They were then duly installed as knights, which ceremony was ratified in a little chapel where CRC hung up his golden fleece and his hat for an eternal memorial, and here he inscribed the following: Summa scienta nihil scider, fr. Christianus Rosenkreuz, equis Aureliae Lapidis, anno 1459. After the ceremony, CRC admitted that he was the one who had beheld Venus, and consequently must become porter of the gate. The king embraced him fondly, and he was assigned to a great room containing 3 beds, one for himself, one for the aged lord of the tower, and the third for old Atlas. The chemical marriage here comes to an abrupt end, leaving the impression that CRC was to assume his duties as porter on the following morning. The book ends in the middle of a sentence with a note in italics, presumably by the editor. Under the symbolism of an alchemical marriage, medieval philosophers concealed the secret system of spiritual culture whereby they hoped to coordinate the disjecta membra of both the human and social organisms. Society, they maintained, was a threefold structure and had its analogy in the triune constitution of man. For as man consists of spirit, mind, and body, so society is made up of the church, the state, and the populace. The divine, the state, and the populace. The bigotry of the church, the tyranny of the state, and the fury of the mob are the three murderous agencies of society which seek to destroy truth, as recounted in the Masonic legend of Hiram Abiff. I will take the church as a destroyer, not as a completer. The first 6 days of the chemical marriage set forth the processes of philosophical creation, through which every organism must pass. The three kings are the threefold spirit of man, and their consorts the corresponding vehicles of their expression in the lower world. The executioner is the mind, the higher part of which, symbolized by the head, is necessary to the achievement of the philosophical labor, the crown. Thus, the parts of man, by the alchemist symbolized as planets and elements, when blended together according to a certain divine formula, result in the creation of two philosophic babes, which, fed upon the blood of the alchemical bird, become rulers of the world. We've talked about this, right? The assimilation of the light and the dark would be the two babes, right? You are creating that by blending them together. From an ethical standpoint, the young king and queen resurrected at the summit of the tower and, ensouled by divine life, represent the forces of intelligence and love, which must ultimately guide society. Intelligence and love are the two great ethical luminaries of the world and correspond to the enlightened spirit and regenerated body. The bridegroom is reality, and the bride the regenerated being who attains perfection by becoming one with reality through a cosmic marriage, wherein the mortal parts attain immortality by being united with its own immortal source. In the Hermetic marriage, divine and human consciousness are united in holy wedlock, and he in whom the sacred ceremony takes place is designated as Knight of the Golden Stone. He thereby becomes a divine philosophic diamond, composed of the quintessence of his own sevenfold constitution. Such is the true interpretation of the mystical processes of becoming a bride of the Lamb. The Lamb is signified by the golden fleece that Jason was forced to win before he could assume his kingship. The flying lion is illumined will, an absolute prerequisite to the achievement of the great work. The episode of weighing the souls of men has its parallel in the ceremony described in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. The walled city, entered by CRC, represents the sanctuary of wisdom, wherein dwell the real rulers of the world, the initiated philosophers. Like the ancient mysteries, after which it was patterned, the Order of the Rose Cross possessed a secret ritual which was lived by the candidate for a prescribed number of years before he was eligible to the inner degrees of the society. The various floors of the Tower of Olympus represent the orbits of the planets. The ascent of the philosophers from one floor to another also parallels certain rituals of the Eleusinian mysteries and the rites of Mithras, wherein the candidate ascended the 7 rungs of a ladder or climbed the 7 steps of a pyramid in order to signify release from the influences of the planetary governors. Man becomes master of the 7 spheres only when he transmutes the impulses received from them. He who masters the 7 worlds and is reunited with the divine source of his own nature consummates the Hermetic marriage. Next up will be Bacon, Shakespeare, and the Rosicrucians, but for now, we're going to go ahead and start wrapping this up. And what we have here is, again, a direct correlation to the key that I hold, right? We talked about this yesterday, the exact same thing. I say yesterday, I'm doing this video as if I'm going to release it tomorrow. Like, I'm trying to do these where I'm going to release them faster. So you'll actually be seeing this the same day that I did the last video. So not yesterday, but the last video. There are 7 internal chakras. We're going to enumerate them, right? Base, red. It is the things of this world. The sacral, which is orange, is the emanative, reproductive part. The solar plexus, which is yellow, is the consumptive part. It is the part which nourishes. It is the part that transforms food into energy. The heart, which is green, is right in the middle. It is the connector between the base and the top. The throat, which is blue, is in the throat. Imagine that. It's attached to the larynx, the part where the sound of the toroid that is your life is emitted. The third eye, which is indigo, it is not necessarily right here. We've talked about that before. If you put your finger right here between your eyes, just above the eyebrow line, and you come back here to where the skull comes down and forms kind of a V or a U, depending on your skull, and you draw a line between those 2 points, and then you cross-section that line with right above the ears, like right here where it connects, right? If you put those two and you connect those and you cross those 2 lines, that falls right into your pineal gland. That is the seat of your third eye, which is a projector. And so it is symbolized by indigo, and it is the 6th part. And then you have the crown, which is right here. It is violet. It is where you accept the divine will. It is where you communicate with the divine. You do also in the base, but what you get from the base is not exactly the same thing as you get from the top. Think about what comes out. And then you have the 8th, which surrounds you. It begins at the end of your palms and extends to the base of your feet. It surrounds you, and that is the minimum, right? So it starts at the outside of your palm, if it's extended all the way out like this, and it goes in a perfect sphere all the way around you to the other palm as if you're fully extending your arms, and all the way down to the base of your feet. It forms a perfect sphere. That is the divine source from which your own nature will consummate the hermetic marriage. The procedure of the 7 spheres and the overcoming of the 7 virtues and the 7 vices by the balancing thereof is what I talk about all of the time. There are 7 facets of God. There are 7 virtues. There are 7 vices. They are opposite ends of the same coin. You have wrath and love. You have chastity and lust. You have greed and charity. Those are the divisions, right? There are 7 and 7. They match, they correlate, and they will add up somewhere in your stack. The problem being is that you have to identify where in your stack it is, right? There are these 7 places, right? There are 8, but there are 7 internal, and the overlay of these 7 with your 7 will give you your order of enlightenment. For some people, the biggest, hardest part is wrath. And for some people, it is lust. For some people, it is chastity. Some people, it is charity. It is different for each person. There are ways to determine that. We talk about that in the Infinite Integration playlist. And if that is too woo-woo for you, which I doubt very seriously since you are here, there's also the MBTI parts, which is a little bit less woo-woo, but deals with the same information. You can overcome. You can become ascended. You can reach enlightenment. And we never have to meet face to face. I am showing you a path. I don't say that my path is the only one. There are other ones. This path does not necessarily align exactly with the path that I am on, but it is close enough that you can get where I am from here. Now, I have to take it on faith that this was put there for that reason, because what I deal with, what I talk about, the path that I am on, was directly revealed to me before I read any of this, right? I had very basic understandings of all of these concepts before they were put together for me through divine revelation. You don't have to believe that. I'm here to tell you, not convince you, but it's true. I am on a path. It may not be the path, but it is definitely a path, and it definitely lines up with this. It will definitely change your life. It will allow you to do things. But you have to be extremely careful. Now, they had 5 rules. There are 8. The 8 I have was given to me in the exact same way that all the rest of this was. It's not from me, but through me that any of this is possible. I don't create this. I'm merely relaying the things that were told to me. I don't really have a dog in the fight of whether you reach enlightenment or not. I would love for it to happen, but it does not mean anything to me, right? It means something to you. My path means something to me. I am here to relay it to you because I believe you can follow it. Prayer, fasting, and meditation, the Trinity again, comes down to the same thing, right? It is the Trinity, the 1, 3, and the 8 are very important. The 1 is God, that is all things, it is the source, and it is you. It is all 8 of you assimilated into 1 through the 3. The 3 being the Trinity, the body, the soul, and the becoming, the salt, the earth, and the water, however you want to look at it. Prayer, fasting, and meditation, same thing. Body, mind, and soul, or body, mind, and becoming. It is all the same thing. The Trinity is the same thing. Now, people get tied up in the trappings of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. That's just a different way of saying the same thing, right? The beginning, the emanation, and the thing that allows it to happen. Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. However you want to look at it, the Trinity is a real thing. The 1 is a real thing. The 8 is a real thing. 1, 3, and 8 is the number of manifestation. You have to properly align the 7 plus the 1, which is 8, through the 3, which is the upper, the lower, and the heart, into the 1, which is the divine, which is the divine aura. All of these things play together into the ascension process. There is a process. It is not an overnight thing. It does not happen at the snap of your fingers. There is steps that you must take to get there. And I cannot give you, like I can tell you about them. I have many times. They are outlined in that playlist many times. You can find them. I cannot walk the path for you. The prayer, the fasting, the meditation, that has to come from you. The understanding your shadow and assimilating it into yourself, that has to come from you. I can tell you that it is a necessary step. I cannot take the step for you. And that's where we're going to go ahead and wrap this one up. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult set of topics. This aligns perfectly for me. Like, I can see even the parts that I did not extrapolate upon, right? The 7 levels that he went through, each represents something different. We could have spent another hour and broke that part down, but we're not going to do that. This overall, if you are on the path, lets you know. It does. And so for me, this is fine. This is a good source. I would love to get my hands on an English translation of the original because I do not speak German, but I would really like to see it. I would like to see that chart in clear, plain transcription, right? Like, that was a little bit blurry. It's hard to see. Some of it is in the language that I don't understand. I would really like to see that. I feel like there is some truth in this part, if no other part, right? This has something. Learn from it. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree. If you remain respectful, it gets to remain up. And if you like what I'm doing over here, hit me with that super thanks, because I am not a communist. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.